Hey guys, sorry we missed you. Let's go through everything so you don't miss a thing. Remember, you should be reading your book club book right now. We've already got the green light to start, so if you haven't started, time to begin. And of course, if you have an ebook, always just go ahead and search your LCPS Gmail for ebook, EBOOK. You should have instructions to read it. If for whatever reason you can't access your book club book right now, whether it's a physical book or whether it's an ebook, please let me know. Then I can make sure you get a copy. Okay? So, read your book club book. Now, last class, we talked about this. We worked a little bit more. Remember, your workshop task list number 3 isn't due until January 7th or 8th, but that's going to come pretty quickly. So I think it's probably time that we did a good little check-in. So let's see how things are going. I'm going to drop in a link to this survey right down here in the description of the video. Please go ahead and take that. That's going to be for you, okay? So if I was taking this, pretty simple, I'd just fill this out. And if I've already completed 3 Newsela books, and I haven't started reading yet, but I will, and I promise I'll start today. If I go ahead and submit, what you'll see is you'll see a little rate about scores. Please take a look at those and proceed accordingly. So I'm actually right now, I'm going to go and pause the video so you can go ahead and do this. Click the link in the bottom of the video. Excellent. So let's go ahead, keep moving. Remember, we're working on Newsela's and your book club book. A couple days ago, we already read and debated things about social media. Last class, we worked on box and bullets, which means today we're talking about framing evidence and we're going to draft. So a little note, these notes today, I'm actually going to leave them in a link right down here at the bottom of the video. Go ahead and click that link and open up these notes. I'll actually pause for you to do that. Excellent. So let's briefly talk about framing evidence and what it is and why you need to do it. So, how do you frame your evidence? Well, one thing you need to know is writers frame or they introduce their evidence using specific words and verbs and phrases. So, as we draft, we're going to specify where we found our evidence to build accountability. And since you've already found evidence, we need to acknowledge where it's coming from. So, here's the thing you need to know. Framing your evidence has 5 steps. We're going to take a look at all 5 of them right now. The first step is to use a transition. So you can choose any one of these transitions you want, and this will be the very first word when you're starting off to show your reader your evidence. So I'm always going to have these examples at the bottom of our screen, and there's two examples there. One that says, for example, Harris Cooper, professor at Duke University, suggests that, blah, blah, blah. The other one says, in the article, Does Homework Really Help? From Time Magazine, the writer illustrates how, blah, 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 blah. If you're like, which one's the transition? Well, circle them there for you. There's for example and in the article. So you always have to go ahead and by framing your evidence, you want to start by introducing it. That's step 1. The second step is to go ahead and name your source. This is key, right? So to name your source, you can go ahead and either say the title of the article, the author's name, a study in or done by, or the source's name. And if you take a look here, you can take a look at my second step, where in my first example, I've got my source is actually Harris Cooper. And in my second example, my source is Does Homework Really Help Students? That's the title of the article. So that's the second step. It's a crucial step because you want to make sure you tell your reader where your evidence comes from. Super important, right? So that's step number 2. So if we're taking a look at step number 3 is actually give information about your source. So to give information about your source, you kind of want to give a little interrupter almost, surrounded by commas, to say something about the source, to say why the source is credible or why they should listen to it. If you notice, I actually did that here. If you take a look at my first example, you didn't know who Harris Cooper was until I told you, oh, he's a professor at Duke University. And you might not have known in my second example, where the article, Does Homework Really Help Students? You might not have known where that came from, but I told you that's actually from Time Magazine. So this third step of naming your source is actually incredibly vital because you want to make sure your reader knows you didn't just conjure this up or make this up, right? So let's go ahead and take a look now at our next step. That was step 3. Step 4 is verbs. Verbs matter, and the verbs used to introduce your evidence make a big difference, right? So there's 3 different tiers of verbs to kind of give it power. The first tier is they're strong, they're good. You could say suggests or indicates or argues or implies. That's good. If you want to go for something stronger, you might say, ooh, illustrates or shows or demonstrates. But if you really want to bring it home, these are your best verbs to use. reveals, proves, makes clear, explains. These verbs really kind of set your evidence up very nicely. So you can take a look at the verbs I use. I didn't even use the strongest, but in my first example, I said suggests. And if you take a look at my second example, I said illustrates. But if you notice, I made a point here. I was going to go ahead in step 4 and use a verb to go ahead and just do that final setup for my evidence before we go further, which means the final step is to add your evidence, right? So whether your evidence is a fact or a quote or statistic or an anecdote or even an example, this is where you finally put your evidence. And it goes after everything, right? So after you've done your frame, after you've done the naming your source, after you've said something about your source, after you've given a verb, finally at the end, do you finally actually go ahead and put your evidence? And one piece of evidence I had was a quote from the article, and my second example, I had paraphrased information about the article itself. So it's really key to remember that there's those 5 steps to go ahead and framing every single piece of evidence you have. Those 5 steps again are using a transition, naming your source, giving information about your source, setting it up with a strong verb, and finally, adding in the evidence itself. So now it's just a matter of, okay, so how do I do this? Let me show you. Let's say this is a screenshot of your box and bolts, it's mine, and I've got this evidence right here. Well, here's the thing. I can't just drop that in my essay. I have to frame it. I have to set it up. So I can do that. If I go ahead and take what we just talked about with framing, with a transition, naming my source, saying something about my source, adding a verb, and then finally my evidence, I can turn that into this. In the article, that's my transition, Matthew Aronsky, that's my source, an assistant professor of adolescent psychiatry at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City, that's something about my source, reveals, there's my verb, and then finally I put in the quote. That is framed evidence. So that's the big thing today. While you're drafting, you need to frame your evidence, okay? But there's one more thing I want to remind you about, okay? I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about paragraph structure. So paragraph structure, remember, for your claim paragraphs involve 5 things. The first part is your claim, right? You need to actually bring over that claim. So my claim here is one reason social media should ban all users under 16 is because social media's addictive lure can negatively impact teens' mental health. Well, do you know where I got that from? I got that straight from my boxes and bullets. Boom, right there. I just brought it over, okay? So step 1's easy enough, copy paste, but let's keep on going. We have structure to kind of keep in mind. Second thing I have to do is I have to bring in evidence with a frame, of course. So my framed evidence here, my evidence was just the more loaded with images a social media site is, and the more rapidly content changes, quote, the greater the chance of an addiction. Teens who get hooked on such forms of social media find it hard to spend too much time away from them. And of course, I just went ahead and framed it with what we know. I've got my transition. I've got my naming of the source. I'm saying something about my source. I've got my verb. And finally, I have my evidence. And of course, you know, I didn't do anything fancy. I just copied that from my box and bolts too. There it is. I mean, I added a frame, but I just brought over the evidence. But this is when we get into the analysis, the part I can't let you forget about, right? The means relates matters. The first part is the means. Go ahead and say what this evidence means in your own words. So I said, in other words, this means the more teens get sucked into the virtual world of social media, the less control they have on the real world. So that's also not fancy either. You know, I got that from the graphic organizer. It was just right here in the means. This means that, and it's had a little hint here. Nothing fancy. You're just going to start to notice a trend that I'm going to start to borrow a lot from the graphic organizer. A lot. But we're not done, right? That's my means. I also have my relates. I have to bring it back to my claim. Why does this matter according to what I said at the beginning? I said this means that while, yes, teens can get momentary boosts in mental wellness from their screens, their mental health exists in real life. The less time they spend in real life, the less control they have over maintaining healthy mental wellness. And again, nothing fancy. Stolen straight from the graphic organizer. There it is. What it means. There's one more step. And while I'm about to show you the last step, I bet you know where it's going to come from. But I've got my means relates and I've got my matters, right? My matters, I have to tie this back to the ban in some way, shape, or form. I have to tie it back to my thesis. So I said, if social media apps banned users 16 under, more teenagers would spend more time in reality where their mental health needs their attention. Without the addictive desire to just check their notifications, teenagers could instead just check in on their mental well-being, which again came straight from my boxes and bullets. And actually, the entire paragraph was written straight from my boxes or from my graphic organizer. Everything came from my graphic organizer. So that graphic organizer might really be something to use. Okay. So how exactly do you draft? Well, pretty simple. Open up your work and go to day 3 for the drafting. And you do have the choice. You can go ahead and draft on your own. While I do not suggest drafting on your own, you could, or you could always go ahead and draft with your graphic organizer, and that I do very strongly encourage. Okay? My final tip, don't forget about your boxes and bullets. That's what got you all set up, right? Remember your boxes and bullets where you already planned out everything about your intro. You already planned out your entire first claim paragraph. You already planned out your entire second claim paragraph. So why wouldn't you use it? But, I'd refer to it, go back to it. But that's pretty much it for today. We talked about framing evidence. I give you some tips on drafting, and then you draft it. So the expectation is before next class begins, you have 4 paragraphs drafted. You have your intro, which you've already planned out on your box of bullets. You have your first claim paragraph, which the first 2 steps you've already got. You just have to do the means relates matters. First 2 steps on your box of bullets. The third paragraph, which is your second claim paragraph, which you've already done the first 2 steps on your box of bullets. You just have to do the last 3 steps, means relates matters. And finally, your conclusion, which I give you a graphic organizer for. So you have everything you need. So make sure you get those 4 paragraphs drafted. Use the graphic organizers if you want. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. But go ahead. Good luck. You got this.